All right, chapter 5, The Covenant Race. The story of the translation of Enoch was later paganized into the legend of the mythical sunbird, the phoenix, which made its appearance at the end of every phoenix cycle and then disappeared again to be reborn or rejuvenated. During the time of the Greeks, who themselves were Aryan Phoenicians and did not call themselves Greeks, but Danaoi, Archaeans, and Hellenes, the term Phoenician applied chiefly to those daring adventurers who went on long voyages. Horapollo, in his days, gives the meaning of the phoenix as a man returning home after a long journey. Scholars in general seem to have overlooked the origin of the term phoenix and therefore have failed to understand that the term applied originally to the few descendants of the survivors of the Adamic deluge who appeared in Eastern Asia. However, as that race became more numerous and spread themselves among the Aborigines, the term was applied only to those hardy mariners that sailed from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. To that race, Professor George Rawlinson pays a fine tribute in his story of Phoenicia without understanding who they really were. The people who, of all antiquity, had most in common with England and the English, the people who first discovered the British Isles and made them known to mankind at large, the people who circumnavigated Africa and caused the gold of Ophir to flow into the coffers of Solomon. The race was formed to excel not in the field of speculation or even of artistic perfection, but in the sphere of action and of practical ingenuity. As shipbuilders, as navigators, as merchants, as miners, as metallurgists, as dyers, as engravers of hard stones, as engineers, they surpassed all who preceded them, and were scarcely surpassed in later times by many. They were the great pioneers of civilization, and by their boldness, their intrepidity, and their manual dexterity prepared the way for the triumphs of later but more advanced nations. They had ventured themselves in many cases where none had ever gone before them, and trusted themselves to fragile boats, dared the many perils of the unknown seas, penetrated deep into the untrodden continents, mixed with savages, affronted the dangers of extreme heat and extreme cold, risked their lives continually night after night and day after day, not so much stimulated by the expectation of large profits as by the pure love of adventure. They explored all the shores of the Mediterranean, the Propontis, and the Euxine, passed the Pillars of Hercules, and launched their fleets bravely into the Atlantic, circumnavigated Africa in one direction, and reached the shores of Britain, perhaps of Norway in another. At the same time, they were, in their own homes, skilled artisans and manufacturers, weavers of delicate fabrics, inventors of dyes of unrivaled beauty, excellent metallurgists, good gem engravers, no contemptible sculptors, while abroad they were the boldest navigators and the most successful traders that the old world ever saw. Worthy rivals of the Cabots and Columbus and da Gamas and Drakes and Raleighs of later times. Active, energetic, persevering, ingenious, inventive, dexterous, not much troubled with scruples, they had all the qualities which ensure a nation in the long run commercial prosperity and the wealth which flows from it, while by their natural vigor and adventurousness, their rough lives and hardy habits, they were well qualified to resist for long ages the corrupting influence of the luxury which is almost certain to follow upon the accumulation of riches. Professor L.A. Waddell, in his remarkable book, Phoenician Origin of Britons, Scots, and Anglo Saxons, supplies us with material evidence furnished by monuments, inscriptions, and coins found in the East and in Great Britain that a large portion of the people of the British Isles are the descendants of the sea-going Phoenicians, and particularly the Bharat Phoenicians. This term of Bharat is of particular interest to us. Our plate 6 shows an ancient engraving representing the Phoenician lady protector of the waters, Bharati, the tutelary goddess of good fortune and fortuna of the Romans of later days. The picture shows a seated queen with her pitcher on her head, symbolizing the waters. In her right hand, she holds a spear like scepter, the trident, and in her left, a cross. She, Barati, is the mistress of the waves and the original of Britannia. Of her, Professor Waddell writes on page 58 and 59 of his book, her proper name is now disclosed by the Vedic hymns of the eastern branch of the Aryan Bharats to have been Bharati, meaning belonging to the Bharats. She is also called therein Brahad the Divine, and she seems identical with Prithvi, or Mother Earth. Her special abode was on the Sarasvati River, which I find was the modern Sarus River of Cilicia, which entered the sea at Tarsus, the Tarsi of its own coins, or Parthenia, which appears to have been the first seaport of the Bharat homeland. In these Vedic hymns, all the attributes of Britannia are accumulated for her tutelarship of the waters and of ships, her lighthouse on the sea, her Neptune trident, as well as the origin of Neptune himself and his name, her helmet and shield, her cross on the shield, as well as the cornucopia, which she sometimes bears upon the Phoenician and Greco-Roman coins, taking the place of the cornstalk on the Britain coins. In the Vedic hymns, she is called the Great Mother, Mahi, and Holy Lady of the Waters, and is hailed as first maid mother in a hymn to her son, Napat, the son of the waters, who has a horse, thus disclosing the remote Aryan origin of the name and personality of the old sea god Neptune and his horses, and accounting for Neptune's trident in her hands. She is a fire priestess and shows the light, thus accounting for the lighthouse on the older British coins with Britannia. The name Fortuna, by which the Romans called this Bharat tutelary goddess of good fortune, as well as the English word fortune, now appear to be coined from her title of Bharati, the letter F being interchangeable dialectically with P and B, as we have seen in the Egyptian Fenka for phonetic, and the Greek pyr for fire, and P and B, and its affix una or one is now disclosed to be derived from the Hitto-Sumerian Ana, one, thus giving the title of the one of Bharats, or fortune. The O came in dialectically like the in Prut on the Newton stone, and the U in Brut, the name of the first Briton king in the ancient British chronicles, as well as we shall see later. Fortuna was figured in identical form and symbols with Bharati and Britannia, and in the same associations with water. Getting tongue-tied. Further striking positive inscriptional proof of this Bharati title for the Aryan maritime tutelary, Britannia, and also of her Phoenician origin, is now gained from the records of each ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, both of which lands are now disclosed in these passages to have derived their civilization from the Aryan Phoenicians. Thus is disclosed the real origin of the name Britain, the title given to the Western Isles by Brutus of Troy about 1100 BC. Brutus gave the land he occupied the name of his own race, Bharat, Brit, Prat, Prut, and Pride, the B and P being interchangeable in the Phoenician as well as the unwritten vowels. On plate 7, figure 1, we have a reproduction of the Bharat name as found by Professor Waddell on a Phoenician tombstone in Sardinia. The same title is also found on the Newton stone in Aberdeenshire, erected by another Bharat prince, Part Alone, king of the Scots, about 400 BC. The names Britain and Britain and British also are derived from the early Phoenician Bharat title. The former two names were we are told in the ancient British Chronicle, as seen later, were given to the people and the country by the first king of the Britons in Britain after his own patronymic name. The original form of the name Britain is now disclosed to have been Bharatana or Brahad Anna, thus Bharat Anna or Brahat Anna, modernized into Britain, means one of the Bharats of Brits. The earlier form of the name is better preserved in the name Dunbarton or Fort of the Bartons or Britons. We have already seen that it was spelled Prydain by the Samaric Welsh and Pretend Oi by the Greeks. But the earlier form was simply Barat in series with the pert or prot of the Newton stone. Similarly, Britain for the land of the Brit presumes a like original Bratat Anna or Brithat Anna, having for its affix the same Hitto-Sumerian Anna, and this geographic use is in series with the Indo-Aryan names. Rajput Anna for the land of the Rajputs, Godwana for the land of the Gons, etc. The Cappadocian Catonia, or land of the Catai, and the Old Persian Susana, the land of Susi, and Ariana, or Aran, the older form of Aran, or land of the Aras, or Irans of Persia. The Anglo-Saxon vagaries in spelling the name Britain well illustrate the dialectic variations in spelling proper names before the introduction of printing, and before the influence of the journalistic press has only relatively recently fixed the spelling of words rigidly in one stereotyped form, an important historical fact which requires always to be borne in mind when dealing with the ancient variations in spelling the same name. The Anglo-Saxons spelled the name Britain in their documents never as Britain, but as Brighton, Broughton, Brioton, Brioten, Breton, Broten, Breton, Breton, and Brighton. It is of interest to know that the Irish name of Bridget is derived from Barate, as well as brat, a bad boy, and the popular provincial English phrase of "oh my eye" and Betty Martin is described from the old literary "oh mihi Britomartis." Britomartis is a Cretan form of the Phoenician water goddess, and Mihi or Mahi, the Aryan title of the great Earth Mother, the Maya of the Greeks and Romans, the goddess of May and of the British Maypole Festival. The Mahabharata epics are part of the ancient Indian Vedas, the epics of the great Bharats, and who were the Aryan Phoenician Bharats or great Bharats. The ancient Indian Vedas refer to these people in the following passages. The able Punch Phoenicians, setting out to invade the earth, brought the whole world under their sway. Mahabharata, Indian epic of the great Bharats. The Brihat Briton singers belauded Indra. Indra hath raised the sun on high in heaven. Indra leads us with single sway. The Panch Phoenician Brahats, leader of the earth, ours only and none others is he. Rigveda. The able Punch Phoenicians are all highly blessed and know the eternal religion, the eternal truths of religion and righteousness. Mahabharata epics. They are spoken of the dynastic people, the same race of which we read in the Indian Vishnu Purana epic. His sources of subsistence are arms and the protection of the earth, the guardianship of the earth. The guardianship of the earth is his special province. By intimidating the bad and cherishing the good, the ruler who maintains the discipline of the different tribes secures whatever region he desires. These people were commissioned with the guardianship of the earth and the protection of the weak. In other words, they were to be the leading race of civilization and the great protective power of the world. Interesting. This is essentially the same mission and destiny we find in the Old Testament bestowed upon the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name is Israel. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. I will preserve thee and give thee for a covenant of the people to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritages. Ye that go down to the sea and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. That's Isaiah chapters 41, 42, and 49. Jehovah is here making a covenant with the inhabitants of the isles who go down to the sea. Now, the Hebrew term used here for a covenant of the people is Britham, which is an almost identical term with the Brit of the Phoenician Barats. The same consonants are used, only the is added, standing for people or multitude. One second, let me get a sip of coffee. The Hebrew word for covenant is brith or berith. Both Young's and Strong's Bible concordances give these terms for covenant as often as they appear in the Old Testament. We are fully aware that certain scholars and theologians reject the derivation of Britain or British from the Hebrew brith, covenant. As, however, Professor Waddell has shown from substantial evidences that Britain is derived from the identical Hebrew Phoenician Barat or Brit, the origin of the word Britain as well as that of the early Britons is definitely established. Professor Waddell identifies the term Barat and Brits with fortunate or fortunate ones, and Baratana as fortunate land. This is therefore the pagan Phoenician equivalent to blessing, and those blessed people in the fortunate land or islands to whom pertain the divine promises. Additional evidence regarding the derivation of the terms Brith and Britham is derived from the Welsh triads, which speak of the Brith y Brithan, meaning covenanters of the land of the covenant. This is what the ancient Britons called themselves. So also is the ish in British derived from the Phoenician and Hebrew word ish and ishi, meaning man or my man. The term in British therefore means nothing less than covenant man. Some people may reject that because they want to, but we have to take the facts as they present themselves to us. It was Brutus, the Trojan, who arrived in England around 1100 BC, whose name is a variant of British, and gave the land the name of Britain, land of the covenant. Of him we shall read more in chapter 9. In the 12th chapter of Genesis, we find how God called Abram out of the land of Chaldea, verses 1 to 3. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will shew thee, and I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. In the 17th chapter, Abram's name is changed to Abraham, Ab, father, Ra, ruling, Ham, multitude, which means father of a ruling multitude. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. The various promises have been discussed by the present writer in his Destinies of Israel and Judah, but I wish to quote here one more passage in which God confirmed his covenant with Abraham to his grandson Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to do the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And, behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. Genesis 28, 14, 15. All these passages show that Israel is to be the ruling race of mankind and the builders of civilization. This is also the mission entrusted to the Aryan Phoenicians, of whom the Bharat or Brits were the central stem, as Professor Waddell has found from the Indian Vedas and monumental evidences. It is very unfortunate, however, that Professor Waddell has no faith in the Bible, and as he makes the common mistake of calling Israel the Jews, he fails to see that the Bharat Phoenicians of 1500 to 1000 BC were mainly the Israelites. The reader will understand this fully after reading the next chapters. Professor Waddell's discoveries have been made from sources entirely outside of the Bible, and he is unwittingly confirming the Bible and what the present writer has established from other quarters concerning the identity of the Aryan Phoenicians. A passage in the Mahabharata epic tells us that the leading clan, the Bharat Phoenicians, trace their descent from one King Bharat, and King Bharat gave them his name to the dynastic race of which he was the founder. Excuse me. And so it is from him that the fame of the dynastic people hath spread far and wide. In the Rig Veda hymn, we find a passage, like a father's name, men love to call their names. Professor Waddell, on page 38 of his book, says, and King Bharat, after whom his ruling clan called themselves, was the most famous forefather of the first Phoenician dynasty, which event I find by the evidence occurred about 3100 BC. Now, as we have already seen from other sources, the date 3100 BC falls within the years of Enoch, who was the father of the house of Enoch, the Phoenicians, and we know the full identity of both King Bharat and the Bharats, Brits, or Britons, the covenant race coming down from Enoch, Noah, Shem, Eber, Abraham, and Israel. It is very unfortunate that our Oriental scholars who have interested themselves with the history of the Phoenicians, like Professors George Rawlinson and Waddell, have been unable to see that they were the Adamites who survived the deluge. Yet both of these scholars testified that they were pure monotheists, or worshippers of the one God of the universe. Professor G. Rawlinson, in his History of the Phoenicians, says, originally, when they first occupied their settlements upon the Mediterranean, or before they moved from their primitive seats upon the shores of the Persian Gulf, the Phoenicians were monotheists. It was no idolatry. When the one God alone is acknowledged and recognized, the feeling is naturally that expressed in the Egyptian hymn of praise. He is not graven in marble, he is not beheld. His abode is not known, there is no building that can contain him. Unknown is his name in heaven. He does not manifest his form. Vain are all representations. To this, Professor Waddell adds on page 264 of his Phoenician origin, it was this pure and lofty monotheism of the early Phoenicians, expressed in their so-called sun worship or Bel worship, which they are now found to have cherished down the ages in the Mediterranean. From it, the early Phoenician merchant princes derived their happy inspiration. They carried it with them as they plowed the unknown seas. They invoked it in their hours of danger and transplanted it at their various colonies and ports of call. And they carried it to early Britain and disembarked and planted it along with their virile civilization upon her soil about 2800 BC or earlier. The early Aryans appeared at first to have worshipped the sun's orb itself as the visible god. In thus selecting the sun, it is characteristic of the scientific mind of these early Aryans that in searching for a symbol for God, they fixed upon that same visible and most glorious manifestation of his presence that later day scientists credit with having emitted the first vital spark to this planet and with being the proximate source and supporter of all life in this world. But at an early period, some millenniums before the birth of Abraham, the Aryans imagined the idea of the one universal God as the Father God behind the Son, and thereby gave us our modern conception of God. This is evident in the early Sumerian hymns and in the prehistoric cup marked prayers in Britain, and it is also thus expressed in one of the oldest Aryan hymns of the Vedas, in a stanza which is still repeated every morning by every Brahmin in India who chants it as a morning prayer at sunrise. The sun's uprising orb floods the air with brightness. The sun's enlivening Lord sends forth all men to labor. In the Indian Vedas, God the Creator is spoken of as Indra or Indara and is invoked as the creator of the sun. He is man's sustainer, the bountiful protector, the most fatherly of fathers, our forefathers, friend of old, swift to listen to their prayers. There is no comforter but thee, O Indra, lover of mankind. Professor Waddell, however, is mistaken in assuming that sun worship was the original worship. The first worship was by means of a sacrifice offered by Abel, as told in Genesis 4:3. It was later that the sun or Bel worship was instituted, wherein the Creator was worshipped through his visible symbol, the sun, as Bel or Baal in Phoenician stands for Lord, while God is El or Al. It indicated that Bel or sun worship was not the original worship. Moreover, the symbol for the Bel worship was two crossed sticks being rubbed together to create fire. This seems to indicate that it was man's creation. There is no doubt that the Phoenicians and some of the early Britons were worshippers of the sun and of Bel, the god of sunfire. Thus, for instance, the Newton Stone in Aberdeenshire was erected in honor of Bel by Partholon, the Brit. See plate X and note the swastika. You don't get to see that one today. Waddell, I don't think. I think that comes up later. Waddell also finds that the word blazes is derived from bell or fire. The lightning of Bon or Bell fires and the custom of the young people of jumping through the fires at the summer solstice on the 22nd of June, still prevailing in many parts of Britain and on the continent and lately revived as a national custom by the Nazis in Germany, is a survival of this ancient sun cult or bell worship. The custom of passing through the fire represented a ceremonial purification by fire or baptism by fire, whereby the believer is cleansed of his sins and protected by the central fire of the sun. Although the Phoenicians themselves and the early Britons may not have made human sacrifices to Bel, as other Bel worshippers did, yet both the sun worship and the passing through the fire are considered abominations in sacred scripture, because in the sun worship, the visible sun is substituted for the true sun of righteousness and the creator of the sun. Refer to Ezekiel 8:16. As it is today, so it was in the days of old. It is very easy for people to leave the real and adopt the fictitious and to worship an image instead of the true God.